Your biggest enemy? It's not the boss who overlooked you, not the algorithm that ignored you, not even the people who doubted you. It's you. You with the doubt. You with the delay. You with the distraction disguised as perfectionism. You've fought so many invisible battles, but none fiercer than the war within. The one between the version of you that says, I can't, and the one that whispers, but what if I don't quit? Every time you break a promise to yourself, you teach your brain that you can't be trusted. You slowly rewrite your identity as someone who almost gets there, almost starts, almost follows through. And that erosion, that's not laziness. It's self-betrayal. What's wild? You wouldn't break promises to people you love, but to yourself? Daily, casually, quietly. You say, I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes never. You say, I'm just tired, but what you're really tired of is your own excuses. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Nothing changes if nothing changes. And that change, it doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with memory, not of your failures, but of your fire. That version of you that started before you knew how. The one who tried anyway. The one who didn't need applause to take action. They're not gone, just buried under doubt and delay. It's time to remember them. That moment, when you stop blaming the world and start owning your fight, is the moment you begin to build real mental toughness. You didn't come this far to forget who you are. You've seen glimpses of your potential. Those quiet moments when you followed through, the small wins no one saw, but you felt. You've built more than you give yourself credit for. You've endured more than anyone knows. And even on your worst days, you didn't quit completely. That counts. So today isn't about doing everything. It's about doing one thing that builds trust with yourself again. One decision, one action, one moment that says, I don't need perfect, I just need progress. Because every time you show up, messy, late, unsure, you prove to yourself, you're no longer the enemy. You're the one who came to win the war. And here's the wildest part. You already have the proof. You've overcome storms no one knew you were walking through. You've shown up on days your mind begged you not to. You've rebuilt more times than anyone can count, but because it wasn't loud, you forgot it counted. So let this be the reminder. Quiet progress is still progress. Silent wins still build strength. And showing up, especially when no one's watching, is how real warriors are made. You don't have to feel ready. You just have to remember who you are and take one step like you mean it. That's what mental toughness really is. And you've been building it all along. You see, it's easy to look back and regret all the moments you fell short. But what if, just for a second, you looked back and saw what you survived? Every skipped workout, but you never fully gave up. Every time you didn't feel ready, but you still tried. That's not weakness, that's resilience in motion. You weren't failing, you were forming. Because growth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, I showed up today. You don't build identity in your highlight reels. You build it in the days that don't get posted, in the quiet reps, in the lonely mornings, in the silence after you say, I'm still here. So the next time you feel behind, pause. Don't sprint. Don't scroll. Just breathe and return. Return to your standard. Return to your promise. Return to that version of you who said, I don't quit, even when it's invisible. That's the work that counts. That's the work no one claps for, but you carry with you. And every time you carry it, you're not just building habits, you're building a foundation, one that doesn't wobble when life shakes, one that doesn't break when no one's watching, one that reminds you you never needed motivation, you just needed to remember your strength. And now, you have. You keep saying you're waiting for the right time, but deep down, you know it's already passed you by. It's not time you lack, it's necessity. Because without pressure, you drift. Without urgency, you stall. Without clear consequence, you stay stuck, pretending you're just being patient. Let's be honest, you've been almost ready for years. You've been about to start since last January. And every morning you wake up in that same fog, not because you're lost, but because you won't move. You don't need another plan. You need a reason that scares you straight. Because the truth is, we don't rise to our goals. We fall to our systems. And most people don't have broken dreams. They have no structure to hold their dream up. You're not lazy. You're unanchored. A river without flow becomes a swamp. Still, stuck, stagnant. You weren't meant for that. You were meant to run with conviction, but instead, you're walking in circles of doubt. You keep waiting for motivation to arrive, but motivation only visits those already in motion. So maybe it's not about feeling ready. Maybe it's about making it urgent. Remind yourself of the cost of waiting. Not just missed opportunities, but missed versions of yourself. The version who could have written that book, started that business, changed their health, redefined their identity. They're not some imaginary future. They were just 90 days away. From the moment you finally said, "I'm tired of circling the same mountain," you don't need to be fixed. You need to be found by your own awareness. Because how long can you live in almost disciplined, almost focused, almost the person you promised yourself you'd become? That's not progress. That's erosion. A slow death of will, of clarity, of self-respect. And the worst part, you feel it. That subtle shame, that quiet whisper that says, you were made for more than this delay. And you were. Mental toughness isn't built in spotlight moments. It's built in silence, in tiny, private decisions, when no one's watching, when the reward is distant, when quitting is convenient, but you choose differently. It's the clarity to say, this matters now. Not someday, not when it's easy, but when it's right. And right isn't always comfortable. That's how pressure is born. Not from the world, from within. That's when you stop floating and start forging. Not a life of convenience, but a life of conviction. So ask yourself the real question. What would your life look like if you stopped entertaining delay? If you stopped calling hesitation strategy? Stopped calling distraction research? Stopped labeling procrastination as perfectionism? You'd stop checking how others are doing and start checking your own standard. You'd stop asking, is this the right time? And start declaring, now is the time I decide. Because discipline isn't something you have, it's something you choose. Again and again and again, until it's no longer a choice. It's who you are. And that first step, even if it's messy, it's yours. That's how you break the loop of almost, of tomorrow, of just one more delay. Because here's the truth, the loop doesn't break itself. You do that. And the second you do, you shift from drifting to designing, from explaining to executing, from circling the same mountain to climbing it. That's the line. Not next week, not after one more excuse. Now. Because the longer you wait to feel pressure, the longer you carry regret. And regret, that's the heaviest weight a powerful mind will ever bear. You've been walking with a quiet frustration, a subtle ache whispering, I should be further by now. But you're not behind, you're just distracted. Distracted by what's urgent, not what's important. By comfort, not calling. By opinions, not ownership. You've let ease become your compass when you were built for storms. You've let hesitation become habit when action was always your medicine. But this moment, this is your return. Return to your standard, to your soul, to the version of you that doesn't wait. It builds. You don't need a second wind. You need a first stand. One that says, I may not be where I want to be, but I'm done being who I'm not. That's not just fire, that's freedom. So if you forget everything else, remember this. You weren't meant to wander. You were meant to win with weight, to carry pressure and convert it into presence, to take pain and turn it into purpose. That's how mental toughness is formed. That's how legacy is built. You are not broken. Let that sink in. Because the world has tried to convince you otherwise. It told you your scars made you small, that your silence meant weakness, that your delays defined you. But they were wrong. You were never broken. You were buried. Buried under doubt, under noise, under expectations that never truly belonged to you. And when gold is buried, it doesn't lose its value. It simply waits to be uncovered. And now, you remember. You remember the version of you that dared to begin. And that didn't wait for applause. That didn't perform, but pursued. They're not gone, just waiting. Waiting for you to come back. Not with hype, but with honesty. Not to perform, but to reclaim. Because you don't need to reinvent yourself. You need to recover yourself. And that recovery, it doesn't begin with doing. It begins with seeing yourself clearly. Not asking what's wrong with me, but declaring there's more within me. That's how identity is rebuilt, not through perfection, but through presence. The kind that walks, that builds, that becomes. This isn't the end of the story. It's the return to the beginning. The version of you before the noise, before the doubt, before the delay. And they're still here, waiting for you to show up. This is not just a message. This is your return to presence, to purpose, to the version of you that doesn't shrink, doesn't stall, doesn't apologize for existing deeply and honestly. You are not broken, you're becoming, and that changes everything. Because self-awareness is the beginning of self-respect, and self-respect builds self-trust, and self-trust builds mental toughness. You see now, you weren't late, you were just early in a world that hadn't caught up to your depth yet. And that depth, that's not your flaw, it's your power. You don't rebuild identity in the noise. You remember it in the stillness. That's where you stop shrinking for approval and start standing for alignment. That's the moment you stop running and start returning. Welcome home. Yes, you'll still have doubt, you'll still stumble, but doubt doesn't disqualify you. It invites you deeper. Because confidence isn't loud. It's quiet conviction built in the absence of applause. You don't need everyone to understand your path. You just need to trust it. Maybe the greatest act of courage is to remember you were always enough, even before the world said so. So stop editing your essence and start embodying your truth. You were never meant to blend in. You were born to break through. And when you do, you don't start from scratch. You start from soil, from the ground where your identity was buried, not lost. You rise. Dust still on your shoulders, scars still soft, but stronger than you've ever been. Because you didn't need reinvention. You just needed remembrance. So stop asking, when will I arrive? And start living like you already have. You're not a project, you're a presence. Presence doesn't beg, it doesn't prove, it just is. And if you feel that quiet pulse inside you, that's your fire. That's your truth returning. Let this moment be your resurrection, not to please, not to impress, but to finally fully live. Not for hype, but for honor. Not for likes, but for legacy. You've done the doubting, you've done the delaying. Now it's time to do the rising. Not because you're ready, but because you've decided waiting is no longer an option. This isn't a comeback, it's a becoming. Because trying is what you did when you were afraid. Becoming is what you do when you're done pretending. So burn the scripts, shatter the boxes, bury the noise, and walk with nothing but your truth. Because real power doesn't come from noise, it comes from alignment. And alignment says, I am not who I was. I am not who they told me to be. I am who I choose, fully, finally, fiercely. So breathe deep. You've been holding ashes, but now you breathe fire. This time, you rise with clarity, with conviction, with company, because you're not walking alone anymore. Mindset Mastery Hub, not a platform, a promise, not a place, a path, a space built for those who've outgrown the surface and are ready to lead from substance. You didn't just survive, you rebuilt. You didn't just dream, you delivered. You didn't just speak, you embodied. And now you don't chase alignment, you are alignment. Welcome to the work, the real work, the quiet, unshakable, everyday kind, where you don't need hype to stay focused. You don't need proof to stay faithful. You just need your standard, your clarity, your fire. And from here, you don't start over. You stay solid, you stay seen, you stay home, not for applause, but because your future deserves to hear your voice, finally, clearly, unapologetically. This is your return, not to what was, but to what always could have been. And if you're still here, still breathing through these words, then you already know. You are the story the world needs. And now, it's your time to be read, not edited, not erased, but embodied. And remember this, you never needed fixing. You just needed reminding of the voice that speaks with quiet thunder, of the fire that doesn't flicker, it fuels, of the self that never left, only waited for you to stop shrinking for love, to stop bending for validation, to stop trading your truth just to belong. And now that you've stopped, you can finally start, not as the version they understand, not as the version they approve, but as the version you admire. Because healing, it isn't a return to who you were. It's a release into who you've always been becoming. And maybe that's what the world has been waiting for. Not perfection, but presence. Not performance, but your unfiltered, unshaken, unrepeatable essence. So breathe. Breathe in this moment. Breathe in the quiet power of finally coming home to yourself. And if no one told you today, we're glad you remembered. We're glad you're here. Mindset Mastery Hub, where clarity leads, where pressure becomes purpose, and where your story finally gets told in your voice.